Last Sunday I began a little series that we'll be doing through the summer on attitudes. And the fact that you and I can have a positive attitude, we can have a negative attitude, but the bottom line is we choose our attitudes. Attitudes are a choice. We don't always have a choice in our circumstances. Things happen in life that you and I can't control, but we do have a choice in the kind of attitudes that we have. And so last Sunday we looked at a negative attitude, which was the attitude of complaining. And just to remind you, and for those of you that weren't with us, by complaining, I didn't mean that, like, on a rare occasion you have a gripe. But I mean when that is just your persona, or when that's my persona, when that's our affect around other people, at work, at home, in church, at school, where we just bring a negative, complaining, nothing's ever right attitude into the room. And so we looked at that attitude. This morning we're going to look at the exact opposite. The exact opposite of that attitude. We're going to look at the attitude of gratefulness. The attitude of being thankful. And I don't want you to now immediately think, oh, okay, this is going to be like those typical Thanksgiving service sermons that I hear from time to time. We're going to, I hope, drill down a little deep this morning on the power of thankfulness and the consequence of being ungrateful. And so the attitude, choosing the attitude of being thankfulness. Our passage this morning comes from Luke chapter 17. We're going to look at a couple other scriptures this morning, but the primary one is in Luke chapter 17, where the gospel writer shares this. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. Let me pause there for just a moment. Everything that Jesus does in Scripture is done with purpose and with intention. And so Jesus is taking a very odd route here as he travels, and he is in this borderland between Galilee and Samaria. And if you know anything about the New Testament environment, you know that Samaritans and Jewish folks just did not like each other. Did not like each other for a centuries-long multitude of reasons. And so this area between Samaria and then Galilee, inhabited by Jews, is really no man's land. It's no man's land. And Jesus is going to encounter a group, and he knows he's going to encounter a group because he's on this odd route with purpose in this no man's land. And so it says, as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." The reason that Jesus does this is that the priests had religious authority and social capital to pronounce people clean. And so if the priest pronounced you unclean, you were free to mingle and socialize and go about your daily routines. If a priest pronounced you unclean, then you had to step out of society. And so that's why Jesus references here, go show yourselves to the priest, because they have the social capital and religious authority to pronounce these lepers clean. And as they went, they were cleansed. And here's where we kind of get to the meat of the passage that's the focus of our attention this morning. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." We're going to talk about a couple of key words in this particular passage this morning. 3 truths, if you're words from this passage. The one is very obvious, and we're going to kind of quickly move from that. But everyone here in the passage needs the Lord. Everyone needs the Lord. All 10 cry out to Jesus, holler over to him from where they are gathered, asking for mercy, asking for favor, implying asking for healing. And I would say to you that truth still holds sway 2 millennia later. Everyone needs the Lord. Everyone needs the Lord. And so all 10 are in here when it comes to Jesus. They want his attention, they want his blessing, they want him to do something, all likelihood of healing, in their lives. Everyone here needs Jesus. We move then to the second point, which again kind of begins to get us into what's at the heart of this passage, and that is that only one thanks Jesus personally. Only one thanks Jesus personally. And it's real easy for us to kind of get a little angry and get a little cynical about the 9 who didn't come back. Because where we sit, we can obviously say to ourselves, I mean, gee, if I had gotten healed along the way and Jesus was the source of that miracle, man, I'd surely be back there. I'd be right there at his feet. I'd be thanking him. I certainly wouldn't be like those other 9. Before we jump to that place, let me just remind myself, that sometimes you and I are impoverished in our gratitude toward God. It's a little thing we ought to note about complaining as we think about that. And just because our complaining may be understandable doesn't always mean it's excusable. Let me give you a little example. Many years ago, I took a mission trip to Kenya, and a few of us were out with the missionary, and we were in a very rural, remote part of Kenya, and we were doing some construction with some native Kenyans on a building in this particular village. Now, this building had multiple functions. The building was a medical clinic sometimes. During the week, it was a schoolhouse. And on the weekends, it was a church. And so many activities going on in this particular building, kind of a community center. But again, on the weekends, it was a place of worship. It was a Christian house of worship. The house, the structure, had a dirt floor. And was probably the footprint of it about the size of the platform that I'm on this morning. Had a corrugated tin roof, and had log walls, and the jinking in between the walls had 3 ingredients: mud, straw, and manure. I was talking with the pastor of the church that met there as we were working on this little building. And I asked him, I said, well, how many folks come on Sunday morning? And, he said, oh, we have 200 people on Sunday morning. Now, the village probably didn't have but maybe about 80 people. 200 people on Sunday morning. I said, wow. He said, oh, yeah. He said, it's great. He said, now, most of them walk for more than 5 miles away. All right, so I want you to think about that this morning. That there's a group of 200 Christians that are worshiping on a dirt floor in a mud manure hut with a tin roof in Kenya. Okay? Now, as you drove in this morning, did you happen to think or ask yourself, I wonder if I'll like the music today? Well, it's Communion Sunday, and, sometimes Nelson doesn't take that into account on his messages. We kind of run over on Communion Sunday. What will do that without that? What would have been your attitude if you walked in this morning and the air conditioning was not working in our sanctuary today? And it was 82 rather than 72 in here. Are you with me? Let's not start dumping on the 9 that didn't show gratitude. let's be really careful about assuming we would have been in the company of the one that came back to Jesus. I want to simply suggest, by extension of my example, there is so much, and I'm guilty of this as well, there is so much in life that are God's gifts, God's blessing, God's doing in our lives that you and I do not adequately, regularly, enthusiastically give to Him gratitude. And so in this scene, in this story in Luke 17, only one comes to thank Jesus personally. And that makes him very different from the rest. And I want to suggest to you this morning that when we think about the power of the attitude of being thankful, in other words, we choose that to be our mode of operation. When we choose to be different, we can choose to be thankful. Choosing to be thankful will make us a different person. And that is what has set this particular leper apart from the other 9. So everybody needs Jesus here. Point number 2, only one returns to thank Jesus personally. Third point is only one experiences Jesus powerfully. It's interesting the words that the gospel writer chooses here to describe what happens. The gospel writer Luke says all 10 were cleansed. Right? All 10 were healed physically, temporarily. They'll get something later on. We all do. We'll all have an illness of some kind, down the road. And so all 10 of them are cleansed. But only one, and it's an amazing word that the gospel writer uses here as he quotes Jesus, only one does Jesus say to him, "Go, for your faith has made you well." He doesn't look at the one that has come back and said, "You're cleansed." That's true about everybody in this scene. But he does say, "You have been made well." Now, the word "well" here in the Greek literally means made whole. It also means, and some translations will use this word as the translation saved. The word saved and the word well are the exact same word as used here in Luke 17. So 9 have been healed physically temporarily. 1 has been made whole spiritually for eternity. So only one came back to thank Jesus personally, and thus only one experienced Jesus powerfully. I don't want us to lose what's operative here about this attitude of thankfulness. Thankfulness leads to greater faith. Ungodliness, and I'm going to come back to this in just a moment, ungodliness flows from unthankfulness. Did you ever thought about that? We're going to look at a passage of Scripture here in just a moment that just hits right at that. Gratitude is to show that a kindness received is valued. So it doesn't mean, how if we're a parent, a mom, or a dad, anytime your kid is given a gift, you kind of rib them in the shoulder or whatever, or kind of tap them on the back, and you say, "Well, what do you say?" And the kid, if they're with it, say, "Thank you." That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about just doing some rote kind of thank you. We're talking about understanding that the gift we have received is deeply, sincerely valued. And someone said this, I wish I knew who I could attribute this to, but it's so true, and I don't mean for it to be cliche-ish. Gratitude is the attitude that sets the altitude of life. If you and I choose to go through our days with an attitude of thankfulness an attitude of being grateful, it will completely change our perspective. Now, I want to cycle back to that statement about ungodliness flows from unthankfulness. Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, and I want to kind of work up to this verse, because this is pretty profound. Paul has been writing in the first chapter of the book of Romans about how anybody ought to be able to look at the grandeur of creation, the grandeur of the universe, and know that there's a creator, and be able to acknowledge God. And so that's what Paul has been writing about. But he says, of course, not everybody does that. And then he says this, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God, or what's the next two words? Give thanks. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Paul has made a straightforward connection between the lack of acknowledging God as Creator and Redeemer and simply being ungrateful. They did not acknowledge Him and give thanks. When you and I are ungrateful to and before God, we'll never be close to Him. We'll never know Him. We'll never be able to understand fully what it is that He has done for us, and the love He has for us, and the gift that was and is and forever shall be Jesus Christ. I was listening some time ago to a guy by the name of Brother David Stendhal. He is a Catholic monk that lives in Scotland, and he gave a TED Talk some time ago. 7 million people had Googled it. And he was talking about gratitude, and he said this, and I want to share this with you this morning, because he's talking about gratitude as we are this morning, operating out of faith. And he said something that was very countercultural about gratitude and about thankfulness. You see, the culture says this is the way thankfulness and gratitude should work. This is the cultural formula for thankfulness, for being grateful. It is that when something good has happened, we are thankful. When we are happy or joyful, then we express gratitude. That's the way culture says gratitude works. That's kind of the formula. Biblically, scripturally speaking, it is the exact opposite of that. It is choosing to be grateful that we become joyful. It is choosing to be grateful, to have the attitude of gratitude and thankfulness, that you and I are contented. That you and I find peace. When you and I wake up and choose the attitude of gratefulness, that is countercultural. Almost all scriptural principles are. So this comes as no surprise. That's the power of choosing to be grateful. When we think about it that way, then we can begin to understand better and more deeply what Paul wrote in Ephesians 5:19. He says, make music in your heart to the Lord always, 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 giving thanks to God. Not sometimes, not occasionally, not when circumstances line up in happy ways. This is always. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, be joyful, give thanks in all circumstances. Why? Because being grateful is not an emotion. It's an attitude that we can choose to live in and to live through. I want to close with this illustration. A guy by the name of John Kralik. About a decade ago, he was a practicing attorney in Los Angeles, and his legal practice was not going well. The year was 2009, and it had just been a bad, awful year for him personally and for him professionally. He could provide no Christmas bonus to his paralegals or other staff of his law practice because most of his clients weren't paying their bills. And so he was alone, had no family, had a deteriorating law practice, was on the verge of bankruptcy, and was in, as one can imagine, a funk. And so on New Year's Day in 2010, he decided that he would get up that morning and he'd go for a nice long hike in the hills outside of Los Angeles. And as he's doing that, he decides to do something. And this is the something that he decided to do. He said, I'm going to, every day, every morning, first thing I do, I am going to write someone a thank you card for a gift that they've given me, a kindness that has been shown that I deeply and truly value. I'm going to do that every day for 365 days throughout 2010. So we did. Every morning. And if he couldn't mail the card, he would hand it to the individual personally. A few folks who didn't have their address, he wrote up a nice email. But every day, he wrote somebody, somewhere, a thank you note. Changed his life. Because he said that once he started doing that, he realized all the negatives that he had been in, how blessed his life was, how gifted an individual he was, how good God was. When he woke up every morning and began the day by choosing the attitude of gratefulness. He wrote a book about that experience entitled A Simple Act of Gratitude, the thank you note. The summary truth of Luke 17 is that thankfulness is a life-changing decision. When you and I choose to be grateful, it is then that we begin to understand joy, experience contentment, know and receive more fully and deeply the blessings and the gift of God. And it makes so much difference in this expression of gratitude by the one leper that returned. Jesus says, what, you've been cleansed? Nah, more than that. You don't have leprosy anymore? Not more than that. He says, go, for your faith that has elicited praise and gratitude has made you whole. Let's pray. Father God, we will have to admit, confess, say to you this morning that we too often are in the company of the nine. We take blessing and gifts from you for granted. Lord, forgive us even when we think we are entitled to that. Lord, we can choose to wake up every morning and think about what we don't have. Or we can choose to wake up every morning and be grateful, to be thankful. And when we begin to do that and live in that attitude, deeply in that attitude, to make music in our hearts, as Paul wrote, with that attitude, then we begin to see all those blessings and those gifts that maybe up to that moment, we're just totally unrecognized, unacknowledged, unreceived. What a difference an attitude of gratefulness can bring to our lives as we see more fully and deeply who you are and the gift that was, is, and forever shall be in Jesus Christ. And when we receive that and claim that and live in that gift, then we are